Okay, so welcome to module number 7 of this Pawsey user training series. The topic is accounting model overview. This is module 7 out of 11 that make up this training series. Among the outcomes for this module are the meaning of what an accounting model is and how it is implemented at Pawsey, and what compute allocations are and why we use them. And we're also going to practice on how to monitor the compute allocation which has been assigned to your project. Watch out for the signs during the session. They highlight key callouts for the module. So, accounting model and compute allocations at Pawsey. The preamble to this module is the fact that supercomputers are shared infrastructure. We've been mentioning that in previous modules as well. And now we're gonna discover some implications of this fact. So supercomputers are expensive infrastructure. They get replaced every few years. So it's an ongoing cost for to maintain and run them. So it's important to use them at best capacity in the best possible way. And so we want to make sure that all users that have access to it can make an efficient and fair use of the machine, and keep it up and running as much as possible. To manage the sharing of this infrastructure, we make use of a few tricks and strategies, let's say. So one is the accounting model, which is used to define and measure the compute resources that are available and get used in the supercomputer. The other one are the compute allocations, which are a way to allocate these available resources to the users that got access to the system. And the third one is the job scheduler, that is the piece of software that actually orchestrates and manages the various pieces of computational workflows that need to be run by the various users of the machine. And so we're going to cover the first two items here in this module, whereas we're going to defer the job scheduler to the module number 8, which is the next one. So an accounting model is just a method to define and measure the usage of resources in a compute infrastructure. And to do so, to measure these resources, we need a unit of measure, and this unit is just called the service unit. And we're going to discover soon how these service units are defined at Pawsey. This is kind of a custom definitions. Different centers may choose to adopt slightly different definitions of a service unit. So it's important to be aware of the definition which is used at Pawsey specifically for usage of Setonix. So in general, and this is quite a typical setup, a service unit relates somehow to the hourly usage of CPU cores of a supercomputer. And then specifically at Pawsey, one service unit is equivalent to 1 hour of use of one physical CPU core. And to this end, let us just remember that the compute nodes of Setonix, each one of them is made up of 128 cores. So one service unit is equivalent to 1 hour use of one of those 128 cores within a node. So the total cost of a computational job in service units will be the number of CPU cores requested multiplied by the wall time in hours. And similarly, if we think about all of the available service units during the year on Setonix, that will be the total number of available CPU cores times the total hours in a year. So just to give you a numerical example, so the first one on the left. So one service unit, for instance, could be used for 1 hour of use of one CPU core, or it could be used for half an hour use of 2 CPU cores. And for those of you that were using Magnus before, this is just another example which relates to Magnus, our previous supercomputer. So if you pick up 576 service units, this amounts to 24 hours, so 1 day of run on one Magnus node. So one Magnus node at 24 cores. Whereas if you go on Setonix, our current supercomputer, that will amount to 4.5 hours on one Setonix node, and that's because one Setonix node has got 128 CPU cores. And so just a bit more on this service unit definition of Setonix. And let us also remember that here we're talking specifically about the current deployment, phase 1, which is all made up of compute nodes with CPU nodes. Phase 2 will also have GPUs, so the model will need to be slightly different in that case. So talking on Setonix phase 1, We've said that the one service unit amounts to the 1 hour usage of one core, but that's not the end of the story. So there is also another consumable resource in each compute node, which is the RAM. So in each node, we have 128 cores and a total amount of RAM that on Setonix amount to about on the standard compute nodes of Setonix, it amounts to about 230 gigabytes. I'm gonna go back to that figure later. One key piece of information is that the fractional allocation, the fractional usage of a compute node is allowed on Setonix. It means that users can request to use not the entire node, not all of the cores and not all of the RAM, but just a fraction of it. Say one core and the corresponding amount of RAM, or half of the cores, and so on. And so because you have this option to choose to use just a fraction of cores and RAM, it's important to define a rule to pick how to compute the service units in case of fractional use. And we achieve that by for each computational job, by looking at how many CPU cores are requested, how much RAM is requested, and then the job is charged the number of service units, which is the largest fraction of the two. And just to repeat it again, so for the cores, one service unit will be one CPU core for 1 hour. For the RAM, it will be corresponding of the fraction of 1 over 128 of the total RAM for 1 hour. And so depending on what you're requesting for the job, the largest fraction of the two will be used to charge the service units. And that's to ensure a fair accounting of a resource usage for all users. And remember, this 128 is a recurring number, and that's because that's a number of cores in a node in Setonix. And so what this means is that if you're just going for a fractional use of a node, the minimum accounting for 1 hour of use will be one service unit, which means that you're using one core, no more than one core and 1 over 128 of RAM. And the maximum charging for one node and 1 hour of usage will be 128 service units, which means that you have been using either all of the cores or all of the RAM or both for that hour on one node. And of course, if you're using multiple nodes, there will be a multiplier taking into account the number of nodes as well. Let me show you a couple of examples here, just to give simple examples, just to give you the idea with graphical representations. So in this case, we are requesting the usage of, so in this picture, we have both cores and RAM represented. In this simplistic case, it's not a real Setonix node, it's just a sample node with 6 cores and 6 blocks of RAM. We're requesting 3 cores out of 6 and 4/6 of RAM. So here, the largest fraction of the two is the RAM fraction. So the charging is based on the RAM fraction, which is 2/3 of a node. In this other example here, we are requesting 4 cores out of 6 and 2/6 of RAM. So here, the largest fraction is the core fraction, which is 2/3, and so the charging is for 2/3 of the total node, times, of course, the hours of usage for the fraction of a node. And just for the record, just a couple of practical examples of how one could estimate the service units required to run a specific job. So imagine running a job for 1 day on 8 nodes. So it means 24 hours times 8 nodes and times 128 cores per node. So here, this is the first example of multi-node resource accounting that we're seeing. So 128 times 8 times the hours, which amounts to 20,000 something service units. Another example here is the case of shared access. So we're not using the full node. So 10 hours on just 32 cores within a node, within a single node. Shared access means just using the fraction of the node, the 32 cores. So will be the number of service units charged will be 10 hours times 32. Now we are running 10 hours on 32 cores within a node, but with exclusive access. It means that even if we're just using 32 cores, we are asking the scheduler, and we're going to see how to do that in the next module. We're asking the scheduler to reserve the whole node for the job. And so when the access is exclusive, you're basically requesting the whole node. So even if you're using 32 cores, you have been charged for the 128 cores of the whole node because you're asking for the exclusive access to the whole node. So in this case, it will be 10 hours times 128. And finally, an example where we're requesting 6 hours on 4 cores within a node, but we're also having an explicit request of RAM of about 100 gigs, which is half the total RAM of the node. So here it's a good idea to compute the two fractions of cores and RAM and see which one is larger. So 4 cores over 128 total is 003. Half of the RAM of the node is 0.5. So the largest fraction here is the RAM. So that's the one that we're going to use to compute the service units charged. So it will be 6 hours times 0.5. And this is the fraction over the total, so times 128. And that's the total core hours, or this is the type of this service units, the total service units being charged for this example job. We're going to have these ones on the recording and on the slides as well for a reference, just to, if you want to practice a bit. So this was about accounting models. So how Pawsey charges for usage of resources, how you can estimate for that usage. And with that information, we can now talk about compute allocation. So we have a total amount of service units available over the year that are awarded on a merit base to all researchers accessing Setonix. And so a compute allocation is the amount of service units awarded to a specific project that was successful in the merit allocation call. So the total units are partitioned across the successful projects. Each project will have their own specific allocation. The way we account for these allocations is based on quarters over the year. So your allocation, which will be in million service units per year, is actually divided evenly within the 4 quarters of the calendar year, and the accounting is reset every quarter. One of the founding principles of accounting is that all projects should get the fair share of the usage of the facility relative to the awarded allocation. So this means that when you get a given amount of service units, there is no guarantee that you can use those. That depends on the way you choose to submit the jobs and so on. What we try and guarantee with the setup of the scheduler and of the accounting model is that all researchers get a fair usage, which is proportional to the awarded allocation. And because allocations get used and you get to spend service units during each quarter, it's important to proactively monitor the allocation through the quarter to optimize usage. So ideally, you would like to be able to use all of your allocation for the quarter. If you use less of that, so you are, in a way, you're wasting what you got awarded. And if you're using more of that, you're going to end up having, and we're going to discover this soon, you're going to have lower priority in running your jobs to ensure fair share of usage by other researchers accessing the facility. And let me go back to this point. I'm going to go back to this point soon. Before doing that, let's just go together for a quick demo on how to monitor usage of your project allocation, of your of your service units. And so let me go back to the terminal. Feel free to follow me with your terminal as well. So I'm now going to log in to Setonix with the SSH command that we saw in module 2 on logging in. It will be SSH username at setonix.pawsey.org.au. Password is requested. Okay, so there is a command called Pawsey account balance. We saw this command in a previous module for checking the file system quotas. We can use this one for service units as well. If you type it without any further options, you're going to get the allocation and usage for your default project. In my case, it's Pawsey 0001. We have a tiny allocation. This is a quarter allocation, so 25,000 service units per quarter. for a total of 100,000 per year. So we've got a tiny allocation here as Pawsey stuff by default, and you see that the usage is slightly over. We didn't manage too well in this quarter, but that's kind of the point anyway. So you got the default project, the allocation, and the usage. If you have multiple projects, you can use the -p option, lowercase p, and provide a different project ID to get information for that other project. And in this case, this is an allocation we use here for testing and benchmarking and user support. It's much larger. And you see, I'm now getting information for this specific project ID. And again, allocation and usage for the quarter. And finally, there is a further option that can be useful, -u, which will give you the breakdown by user for that specific project. So there is the total in the first line and then the breakdown by user, which can be useful just for internal project management and usage of the resources. Okay, so let me go back to the slides. Here I'm just reporting what we just saw. So it's a good practice to proactively monitor your project allocation so that you can aim for full usage of your quarterly allocations with avoiding significant under or over utilizations. And these were the outputs of the demo. All right, so in this module, we learned about what is an accounting model, what are the service units, what is a computer allocation, and we also had a look with hands-on on the terminal on how to monitor the computer allocations awarded to our research project. And we should also share some best practices. Stay tuned because the next module is tightly connected to this one and will be about the job scheduler and how it manages the priorities of the jobs based on the actual computer allocation we just discussed. So on the Pawsey online support portal, there is an extensive support documentation which covers a lot of topics in great detail. There's also a user support portal in case you need direct assistance from Pawsey staff for issues you need help to solve. If you want to get the latest news and the upcoming events at Pawsey, you can sign up for the Pawsey Friends newsletter. So this module is finished. Thank you, and the session is open for questions.